With neither the plaintiffs nor the defendant satisfied with the district court's ruling, all parties appealed to the Supreme Court. Roe, Dr. Halford, and the Does appealed the district court's denial of their request for injunctive relief, while Wade appealed the district court's decision to grant the plaintiff's request for declaratory relief. Similar to the district court, the Supreme Court began by considering whether the parties involved satisfied the requirements of justiciability and standing, and whether abstention was warranted. Accepting as true the facts alleged by Roe, including her situation as a pregnant single woman who was prevented from having an abortion by Texas's criminal abortion statutes, the Supreme Court agreed with the district court's decision that Roe had standing to sue. Wade, however, raised a concern over whether Roe still had standing to sue since, as she was no longer pregnant, the controversy of the case technically no longer existed, and federal cases require that, quote, an actual controversy must exist at stages of appellate or certiorari review, and not just at the date the action is initiated, end quote. Unwilling to let such a rigid application of this requirement prevent the appellate review of pregnancy litigation, the Supreme Court prevented the termination of Roe's pregnancy from making her case moot. The Supreme Court therefore dismissed Wade's argument that Roe's case lacked standing. Dr. Halford presented a different situation to the Supreme Court because he was intervening in an action against statutes which the state of Texas was using to prosecute him. The Supreme Court noted that Dr. Halford did not allege an inability to assert any of his federal rights in his defense against the state's prosecutions. The court also noted that he did not allege harassment or bad faith prosecution, which are the only circumstances when a, quote, defendant in a pending state criminal case, end quote, may, quote, challenge in federal court the statutes under which the state is prosecuting him, end quote. In order to avoid being denied standing for challenging in federal court the statutes which the state of Texas was using to prosecute him, Dr. Halford sought to avoid asserting his status as a current state defendant and instead assert his status as a potential future defendant. Not seeing any merit in the distinction between Dr. Halford's status as a current state defendant and his status as a potential future defendant, the Supreme Court reversed that part of the district court's decision, which granted Dr. Halford declaratory relief, dismissed his complaint, and sent him back to the state court to defend himself against the state prosecutions pending against him. In regards to the Does case, the Supreme Court affirmed the district court's decision to dismiss, citing the speculative nature of their concerns and the inability of their case to present justiciable controversies. Their case rested, quote, on possible future contraceptive failure, possible future pregnancy, possible future unpreparedness for parenthood, and possible future impairment of health, end quote, and that a combination of any one or more of these, quote, might have some real or imagined impact upon their marital happiness, end quote. Having narrowed the parties down to only Roe, the Supreme Court turned its attention to her case. Roe argued that Texas's criminal abortion statutes unconstitutionally violated her right as a pregnant woman to terminate her pregnancy. Rather than seeking to find this right in one section of the Constitution, Roe sought to find this right in at least one of three places. In, quote, the concept of personal liberty embodied in the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause, end quote, in the various kinds of personal privacy previously recognized as protected by the Bill of Rights or its penumbras, or in, quote, those rights reserved to the people by the Ninth Amendment, end quote. In reviewing Roe's case, the Supreme Court first considered whether there are any compelling state interests in regulating the abortion decision. Their analysis revolved around answering three important questions. 1. Has the state regulated abortion? 2. If it has, why did the state regulate abortion? And 3. If the state has regulated abortion, do any of its regulatory justifications rise to the level of legitimate state interests? The Supreme Court answered the first question through a brief survey of the medical and legal history of abortion in the ancient and Anglo-American tradition. This survey revealed, among other things, that the states initially adopted English common law, which distinguished between a pre-quick and quick fetus, providing punishments only for the destruction of a quick fetus. That, in the mid to late 19th century, many of the states began eliminating these English common law distinctions, eventually banning abortion except to preserve the life of the mother. And that, in the last several years, 1/3 of the states had begun reversing this trend by enacting less stringent abortion laws. In answering the second and third questions, the Supreme Court identified three potential historical explanations and justifications for the criminal abortion laws. The three historical explanations and justifications were: 1. To discourage illicit sexual conduct; 2. to protect women from a dangerous medical procedure, and/or 3, to protect prenatal life. Of these, the Supreme Court believed only the second had a historical foundation. However, concerning the second and a modified version of the third, the Supreme Court found legitimate state interests, protecting the health and safety of the mother and protecting potential human life. Next, the Supreme Court considered whether the right to privacy previously recognized as protected by the Constitution extends to a pregnant woman's decision to terminate her pregnancy. In addressing this issue, the Supreme Court admitted that the Constitution does not explicitly mention a right to privacy, but recognized that previous cases acknowledged a right to privacy existing implicitly under the Constitution. These cases found the roots of a right to privacy in the First, Fourth, Fifth, and Ninth Amendments, in the penumbra of the Bill of Rights, and in the concept of liberty guaranteed by the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. They also found that the right to privacy extends to matters relating to marriage, procreation, contraception, family relationships, child-rearing, and education. Given these extensions, the Supreme Court concluded that the right to privacy previously found in the concept of personal liberty guaranteed in the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment extends to a pregnant woman's decision to terminate her pregnancy. On a similar basis, Roe and her legal advisors argued that a pregnant woman's right to terminate her pregnancy is absolute. However, the Supreme Court did not agree, citing the legitimate state interests of protecting the health and safety of the mother and protecting potential human life as eventually becoming compelling state interests during the course of a woman's pregnancy. These compelling state interests, the court argued, qualify a woman's right to terminate her pregnancy. Therefore, the Supreme Court concluded that the right to privacy previously recognized as protected by the Constitution does extend to a pregnant woman's decision to terminate her pregnancy, but that this right is qualified when the legitimate state interests of protecting the health of the mother and protecting potential human life become compelling during the course of a woman's pregnancy.